With Construction Manager Cloud's Advanced Approvals module, you can design and automate the entire approval process for every transaction related to your construction projects. In this video, we will explore how Advanced Approvals allows you to set value limits per user per document type, to create multi-layered approval hierarchies, how both approvers and document creators receive live in-system notifications when a document is either pending approval or the approval process has been completed, how you can easily review the contents of a transaction and approve, reject, or recall a document with a few simple clicks, how you can track the process through a live audit trail, and how you can set an out of office and delegate your approvals to other users. Okay, so we start here in the settings area of Construction Manager Cloud. This is where we will configure our advanced approvals workflow. So within settings and advanced approvals here, we can first of all activate the advanced approvals module. There are lots of configurations of timeouts and weekend start and end dates, values of changes to transaction before they require approval. Lots of detail in here. We can also enable approvals on different transaction types throughout the entire system. But let's move into the user list. Within the user list, this is where we are able to set a value limit against each of our individual users. And that value limit is specific to a transaction type. So here I could say this user, Anthony, they can raise orders up to the value of £5,000. So if I put a purchase order in here, for example, above £5,000, the system will now force me to send that document for approval. I can also set a next approver. So I could say if I was to exceed that £5,000, who by default would then approve my document. Now that next approver can also have an approver and they can have their own value limits and so on and so on. So we can start to build a user-specific approval chain if we want to. That's a very basic setup in terms of our users and our value limits per user and by approver. We can then begin to build approval groups. So for example, I could set up an approval route that will send my document through a potential group. So within the group, I can allocate several different users, and I could say whether the approval or the document is sent for approval to all of the users in the group and whether it requires sign off from everybody within the group or whether it just requires sign off from one person within that group. Within the approval routes, this is where we can create a bespoke approval route, and we can create many different bespoke routes in here. So some of the criteria that's available is I could set up a route specific to a transaction type. So for example, I might send my purchase orders to my procurement team for approval. However, I might send my subcontractor orders and subcontractor payment certificates to my quantity surveyor. So we can set up specific routes for different transaction types. Likewise, for the project manager, I could set up a specific route for all projects managed by this particular user. I can set up job-specific routes. So I could say for this particular job, always send it through one particular route, but for every other job, send it through a different route. A good example there is if you have an overheads contract, you might always want that to be sent to your finance team rather than to a project or a commercial team. Likewise, with job classifications, lots of people set up a job classification for different divisions who are responsible for that project. So you may have a route for that different division or department. We can also set the route to check on either the value of the document or the budget on the job. So for example, if we're checking against budget, we can say, does this transaction exceed the budget set against my tender code? If it does, send it for approval. We can also say, does this transaction exceed the value limit of the user who is entering the transaction? If it does, send it for approval. Or we can check on both the budget and the value at the same time. We can then set our approval routes. So in this case, when the transaction exceeds either budget or it exceeds my value limit, send it to my next approver who is allocated in the user list that we've just looked at. In addition to this, we can also set additional routes. So instead of that looking at the next approver, it could look at the approval group that we've just looked at, or it could look at a named approver. So the named approver will actually ask us who we should send that document to for approval when we create that document or when we create that transaction. Or easily we could say send the document to the project manager on the job or send it to the quantity surveyor on the job. We can actually set up multiple approval route steps per approval route. So we can be very, very complex and very detailed on how we create our approval process. Mine here is just very simple. It's just a team hierarchy. When I create my document that goes over budget or exceeds my value limit, it will by default look at my next approver against my username. Now, in terms of an actual approval workflow, let's raise a purchase order. Now, the actual approval workflow will work exactly the same for all transaction types. We're just going to look here at a purchase order. So let me create a purchase order for materials, for example. We'll add some item lines here. I'll just add this to one of my jobs and I'll choose a tender code. Let's choose materials and I'm just going to choose a product from my list here. Now, this one is within budget. It's within my value limit. Everything should be fine, but I'm just going to put a quantity and a price and we'll add a few more rows to this purchase order. Go and we'll add a couple of lines. So we noticed that there was no issues on the first line, but we'll just keep adding a few lines to my order here so that I can see how I'm going to review all of these lines at once. So I'm just going to pick up any of these items here and we'll just put in some prices. So we've got a very large value on my purchase order here. So I'm now just going to save that purchase order. Now we'll see here that I've now got a request for approval because it has now exceeded the value limit that I have set against my user record. Now if I was to try and print this order or to preview the order, it actually won't allow me to do this. I can't actually send this out to my supplier because it is pending approval. So I'm now going to request an approval here. So that's now requested my approval and it's actually sent my document through my approval workflow. So if I come to my approvals option here, this gives me a list of all the transactions in the approval chain. I can filter this list. I might just want to see my transactions, which I have created. I might just want to see if I'm an approver, show my approvals will only show me the document that I want to approve. I'm just going to look at everything here. Now this is the transaction that we've only just created. I'm just going to come back into that transaction. I can see here that I have an approval history and this will tell me all of the different steps that the document has gone through to find the person who needs to approve the document. So I've got that full workflow available to me. I've also got some notifications here that tell me that I have now requested approval for this transaction. Now, as the approver, I'm just going to open up a mailbox here. We'll see the approver has now received some emails. So I have now received an approval request as the approver via email. So I'm now actually going to open up another copy of Construction Manager Cloud and I'm actually logged in as the approver in this copy of Construction Manager Cloud. We'll see here that I've received some notifications. So we'll see now that I've received a notification to not only approve the value of the document, but also approve on budget as well, because I may have exceeded budget. If I look at my approvals list here, and I filter this list to show my approvals, this just shows me all the documents which I need to approve. If I come back to the email, I have a hyperlink on the email, so I can click onto that hyperlink and it will now open up that transaction that requires approval. So let's come back to the approver. I'm just going to choose the approve option from my list here. I'll just say that that is now approved. I'll give that the OK, and that transaction has now been fully approved. If I come back to my user who created the transaction and I just look at my notifications, I'll see that I've now received a notification telling me that this transaction has been approved. I've also received an email to tell me that my transaction has been approved as well. So if I'm not actually in the system, I will still receive a notification via email. So let me just come back to my list. I'll just refresh my screen here. I can see on my approval list that the value and the budget has been approved. I can see the time and the date stamp of when it was approved as well. I can come back into this transaction by double clicking. I can check the audit trail in my approval history here, and I can also now print or email this document out of the system. So this will allow me now to distribute that purchase order because it's now fully approved. Now, if the approver was actually away from the business and was on annual leave, for example, we can come into the settings as an administrator, and in the advanced approvals option here, I can set an out of office. So I could say who is actually out of office. So let me just edit this one. I could say if I'm out of office, or if this person is out of office, they can record a reason, they can record a start and an end date, and who they wish to delegate their approvals to. So if Sajid Chowdhury was included in any approval workflow within these times and dates, it would send his approvals to Anthony Edwards instead. So that's just a brief run through of how we set up the Construction Manager Cloud Advanced Approval System and how that approval workflow works. It is the same workflow for every transaction type. However, the routes for every transaction type or every job even may be very different. For more information on Construction Manager Cloud's advanced approvals, please call or email us now.